Hey everyone, my name is Suyash and welcome to my YouTube channel. So in the previous video, we understood the agent code and we ran it locally. We understood the local development workflow. We could chat with the agent, we could interact with the agent in the playground, right? But then I wouldn't consider that as testing. It was just interacting with the agent. So in this video, we are going to look specially at testing. So we will open this test folder and we'll walk through every layer of validation this project comes with. So we are going to look at unit tests, which test the business logic, the helper functions, the data processing, right? The code around the agent, and there is no LLM call here. Then we look at integration test, which tests the agent code end to end. So we send a message, we get a response and verify if it makes sense. And here there is a call to the LLM that's made. Then there is eval. This is where we actually evaluate the quality of the response from the agent. So a judge LLM is used to score the agent response. And then there is load tests folder, which is mostly performance testing. We will not cover load test as part of this video. We will cover it in later videos. So let's start with unit testing. Now, all the tests in this project use pytest framework. It's one of the most popular testing framework. It auto discovers the test files which have the prefix test underscore, like you see test underscore dummy.py. And then it's able to test functions which are named again with the prefix starting test underscore. We will look at more advanced pytest features as we encounter them in the code. So if we look at the unit test file, it's pretty simple, right? It's pretty straightforward and it's just a placeholder. The tools that are used in this agent are simulated right now, right? So we have a static response. So there's no real business logic that's there to test. But what is important here is the structure. So when we use real code and real API calls, we will swap this placeholders with real implementations. Okay. Now let's look at integration tests. Integration tests go one step further. They actually create a running agent and then they send it messages. So these make real LLM calls, and this is where things get a bit more interesting. Now let's open test agent.py and we will test the agent, the ADK agent directly. Okay. Now, if we look at the code, we have the imports. Run config and streaming code is basically configuration for how the agent is going to run. We are going to run the agent in the streaming mode so that the user sees the events or words appear in real time instead of waiting for the full response. Then we have the runner. So this is the ADK component that orchestrates the agent execution. Then we have the in-memory session service, which is a lightweight session service, which is in memory, a session stored in memory. And then we have our root agent. This is our actual agent from the app folder, from the app directory. Now let's look at the first integration test. Okay. This is an integration test for the agent's streaming functionality. It tests whether the agent returns a valid response. So if you look at the code, this is the usual code, right? We create the session service, then we create a session with ID test and test user and app name test. Then we create a runner, which is the same component that the ADK web creates for the playground. Then next step is we build a message. So this is the message that is built and sent to the agent. Why is the sky blue? Then we run the agent. So we send the messages through the agent. It returns a stream of events, and then we collect this stream of events into a list. Okay. Next, we check if at least one event was returned, right? Which tells us that the agent streaming was successful. Then we check if there is at least one event that contains the text response. Okay. And think of this more of a smoke test where we try to ask the question, does the agent actually work at all? Okay. It's not a quality test. So quality testing comes later where we evaluate the agent itself. Now let's look at another file, which is test agent engine app. We haven't looked at the production code yet. So this is the code for deployment to agent engine, and we have not looked at the code. But then since this is a testing video, it does make sense to see all these tests together. Okay. And then as we read through the test, we will also try to understand the internals of this code. So we have our imports. We are importing agent engine app, which is a wrapper class we are testing from the agent engine app.py. Next, we define a fixture, a pytest fixture. Now, this runs before each test that actually needs it. So it creates and returns a ready to use app object. So tests do not repeat the setup code. So any test that lists the agent underscore app as a parameter will receive this automatically. Okay. So this fixture creates and sets up agent engine instance. We are also using a monkey patch. So what monkey patch does is it temporarily sets this environment variable for the test only, and it reverts back automatically when the test finishes. Then we set up agent engine, which is the same initialization method that agent engine calls when starting a container in production. So this is more of a setup fixture that gets used. Now let's look at another integration test. Here we're using async IO. It essentially tells pytest to run this async function inside an event loop. Okay, so this is an integration test for the agent's stream query functionality. It tests that the agent returns a valid streaming response. So we define a message hi, and then we use the async stream query. Now this is the same streaming method that agent engine calls in production. Now when we look at the actual code of agent engine app.py, we will understand all these methods, but for now, it's important to understand that this async streaming method is the method that agent engine calls in production. Here, the events that are streamed back are appended to the events list. And then we check whether the length of events is greater than 0. So this is the first check. Next, we parse the raw event data using pydantic to ensure that the response format is correct. Okay, so this is that part. And then here also we check that at least one event has text content. Next, let's look at the agent feedback integration test. So this is the integration test for agent feedback functionality. So there's a functionality of thumbs up and thumbs down button. So this tests whether the feedback can be registered successfully. So this is the feedback data, for example. This feedback data gets registered. Okay. And then if the format of this feedback data is correct, then this should not raise any exceptions. If it does not, that means that functionality is tested. And next, we intentionally send invalid data here to check if the validation fails, if the validation rejects it before it hits our logs. So Python should actually raise a value error when registering this feedback. So this was the integration testing code. Now it's time to run the unit test and integration tests. Okay. So let's start with installing the dependencies, specifically the dev dependencies. Now to run the test, we need additional packages like pytest, and these are declared as dev dependencies in pyproject.toml. Now these include the test dependencies that are not needed for running the agent itself. And that's why we only use this in development environment while testing. So this created the virtual environment and installed the packages for dev dependency, which is for testing. Next, let's run the unit test. So uv run pytest tests and unit. Okay, it will automatically pick up these files because of the prefix, as well as the functions because of the prefix test underscore. Okay, let's run these. So this test passed, and because there is no LLM call here, these are pretty fast. These are just testing the business logic. Now let's run integration tests, and this is where the LLM is actually called. So tests integration. These tests will take some time to complete because, as we said, it makes real Gemini API calls. Great. So all the 3 tests have passed, as you can see. So that tells us that the agent works, but how do we know the quality of the agent response, right? How well does it work? And that's what evaluation is going to answer. So now we are going to shift to ADK evaluation with ADK eval. Now we have covered ADK evaluation in depth in our ADK evaluation tutorial video. Do check it out. Here we will focus on how it is set up in this production project. Okay. Now we know that LLM responses are non-deterministic in nature. So the agent might phrase the same answer differently every single time. And that's why we cannot test assertion, right? We can't test exact outputs every single time. And that's why here an LLM as a judge approach is used. So we send the agent test messages, and then we have another LLM which scores the response of our agent using rubrics or custom criteria. And then we also set a pass fail threshold to understand if the test failed or not. So let's look at the eval folder. This is the eval folder, and this has eval sets, okay, and this has eval config. Now let's look at eval set. Again, we have covered these eval sets and test files in our in-depth tutorial, so do check it out. Essentially, eval set has a set of sessions or test scenarios, and those scenarios are sent to the agent during evaluation. So if you look at the file, we have some metadata, the ID, the name, the description, and then we have a list of sessions or eval cases. So this is one session. We have the ID of the session or the scenario, and then this is the message that's sent to the agent. So this is the initial session state where we provide the app name, user ID. Similarly, there is a second session, okay, which has an ID. Again, we send a user message, which is what's the weather in San Francisco. And the objective here is to test if the agent calls the get weather tool. So as the name suggests, it is a basic eval set JSON, which has only 2 sessions and simple scenarios to test. In a real project, we would add cases for each core capability, edge cases, failure scenarios, and so on. Next, let's look at eval config. So as the name suggests, it is configuration for the evaluation. Okay. So if you see, we define the criteria, which is rubric based final response quality V1. In our in-depth video, we have covered all the available evaluation criteria that ADK provides. Then we set a threshold of 0.8, which means that the score should be above this threshold for us to pass the test case. And then we define the rubrics, right? These are criteria, custom criteria. So one is relevance and the other one is helpfulness. And then the judge LLM uses these to evaluate the response of our agent. Now that we are clear about the eval set and the eval configuration, let's run the evaluation. Okay. First things first, we have to install some extra dependency for agent evaluation. So let's do that. UV sync, the usual dev dependencies, and then this time we also install extra eval dependencies. Okay. And just to let you know where all this is coming from, if I look at pyproject.toml, okay, and if we search for dev, you will see that these are the dev dependencies that we keep installing here. And then there is extra argument and we provide eval. So this is the extra dependency that we are installing for us to run the ADK evaluation. Now to run the evaluation, we are going to use uv run ADK eval. Ignore this statement. It just suppresses the Python warning. So we use uv run ADK eval. We provide the path to the eval set, and then we provide the path to the eval config. Okay. So let's run the evaluation now. Now this takes some time, and while it runs, let me explain what happens under the hood. So when we start the evaluation, the agent gets loaded from the app folder. Then it reads the eval set, which is the two scenarios or two cases we have mentioned. Now for each evaluation case, ADK eval sends the user message to the agent. Then it collects the agent response. And then we send the query, the response, and the rubrics to the judge model. And then the judge model scores the response. And then we compare the score against the threshold to decide if the test was a pass or a fail. We see some logging statements here. And then soon we will see the response of the evaluation. So you can see that the evaluation was completed and both the tests passed. There was no failure. Now what ADK does is it writes the results of the evaluation in a specific file. So if you want to understand the nitty-gritties of the evaluation result, do check out the file, and you will find it in app ADK, this eval result JSON. Okay, it's actually a very big file, but there are only a couple of things that we need to look at, and probably one of the most important one is this, where the final evaluation status should be 1. So we looked at the unit test, we looked at integration tests, we looked at the agent evaluation itself. Okay, till now we ran the commands manually, but then we can automate these set of commands with the help of shortcuts that are available in the Makefile. So if we look at the Makefile, there is a test command. So this test command would typically run all the commands, all the sequence of commands that we ran for running the unit testing and integration testing, right? So it's the same set of commands, uv sync dev, and then we run the unit test and the integration test. Similarly, there is a shortcut for running the evaluation, agent evaluation, right? So in practice, you can use these Makefile command shortcuts to run these set of commands. Great. We have now come to the end of the video. By now, I hope that you have a good understanding of what is actually tested in a production level project. There are unit tests, there are integration tests, then we test the agent quality, we evaluate the agent response, and then there are load tests as well. So that's all for today. If you found this video helpful, do like, do subscribe, do comment, and stay tuned for next set of videos. Thank you.